The physicians recently delivered the heartbreaking news that Lil Scrappy's most recent test results are worse than anyone had anticipated, even though it was thought that he was improving. All of a sudden, everything has changed, and the hospital room is tense as the Scrappy family is afraid, monitors are beeping quickly, and physicians are whispering softly. Bambi waits for answers while Mama D grits her phone. Mama D's voice was sharp, and her maternal instincts came out when the doctor hesitated and said, "Dialysis in an emergency, a possible transplant in the event that conditions worsen, and we might have to think about placing him on life support if his heart keeps failing." "No." With a cry of anguish and despair, Bambi said, "That is not a possibility. Scrappy is a kind of person. This is not how he is going to die." Worst of all, no one understands why Scrappy's health is rapidly declining. His heart rate is unpredictable, his breathing is weak, and the medical staff is unsure of what to do. At this moment, the only thing this family can do is pray for Scrappy to succeed or for something far worse to occur. Watch as we dissect everything, including the startling information about his test findings, the emotional responses of his family, and the physician's final attempts to save his life. Nobody was prepared for this change. The room was filled with the continuous beep of the monitors, a sobering reminder that every second counted, the weight of the machine keeping Lil alive, and the intensive care unit was filled with a stifling mixture of worry and sterility. Once vivacious and full of life, the rapper was now a fragile individual caught in a life-or-death situation. By the time Bambi sat next to him, tearing his fingers with trembling hands, his normally certain countenance was pale, his breathing was laborious, and his condition was worsening. Her normally flawlessly groomed nails had been impacted by the tension of the past few days. Scrappy lay motionless in the hospital bed, his chest scarcely rising and falling with his regular breathing. Mama D, the stern matriarch who had always been a rock, stood near the door and watched with lustrous eyes as she pressed her fingers to his cheek, looking for any movement, and said, "Scrappy baby, I'm glad you got in a fight. You assured me that you wouldn't abandon me." Her eyes were swollen from sobbing all the time, and her voice was raspy from whispering prayers that seemed to go unheard. After struggling for her, she was left with nothing to do but watch helplessly. The door creaked open, and Dr. Mitchell, the main physician, stepped into the room. Though he had spent her entire life shielding her kid from the outside world, his normally serene and comfortable countenance was now itched with stress and fatigue. Her arms were crossed tightly, as if to keep herself together, yet her heart was broken, as seen by her occasional sniffle. "Lord, don't take my boy, not like this," she muttered to herself as she swayed slightly on her feet. He inhaled deeply, put his hands together, and glanced from Bambi to Mama D. "We need to talk in a firmer but softer tone than usual." Bambi's eyes pleaded as her head heard him say this. He asked, "What is it that's going on?" After hearing negative news in the past, this case changed his mood. He had seen the supporters' passionate pleas and the public's outpouring of affection, and he knew how much was at stake. Mitchell raked his gray hair, and the doctor hesitated, then continued, "My liver function has drastically deteriorated. His oxygen levels have fallen again, and his kidneys are under a lot of stress." Everyone felt as if they had been burdened with the news that Scrappy's most recent test results have returned, and they don't look good. Mady took a deep inhale and her hands curled into fists as a thick quiet descended upon the room. "How terrible. You mentioned yesterday that he was improving," but Bambi shook her head. "What caused that to alter so fast?" Speaking in a compassionate manner, Dr. Mitchell emphasized the unpredictability of circumstances, such as his, in which the body may occasionally exhibit symptoms of recovery. His heart has been under constant observation, and there are indications that the strain is worsening. We're doing everything we can, but if Dr. Mitchell's condition doesn't get better the following day, we may have to think about taking more dramatic action. His expression darkened. It's a battle, and it's becoming more difficult at the moment. With tears running down her cheeks, Bambi gripped Scrappy's hand tighter. "If you have nothing to do, What does it mean? We're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens, but I need you both to get ready because the next 24 hours are crucial. Dr. Mitchell nodded solemnly after taking one last look at Scrappy's vitals. Her voice was trembling but firm as she said, "My son has been through too much to just give up now. He will succeed, he must." The world outside the hospital was already responding. Desperate for updates, fans rushed to Instagram and Twitter, and the hashtag prayer for Scrappy went viral. People who had previously disagreed with Scrappy were putting aside their differences to support him, while celebrities, close friends, and other musicians all posted heartfelt messages asking everyone to send prayers and good energies. Unspoken anxieties pervaded the hospital room, and the tension was heavy. "We need to call everyone and beg for every prayer we can get," Bambi remarked in a firm voice after a long quiet. "We are battling, not just praying," Mama D said, nodding and pulling out her phone. One concern persisted throughout the night. Would Scrappy K be rescued this time in the hospital by prayer alone? The machines surrounding him were beeping constantly, each one highlighting how critical the situation was. Outside the hospital, things were just as bad, and Mama D was crying on the inside even though she had a strong facade. Every second seemed to drag on forever because of Scrappy's frail state, and the only sound in the room was the beep of the monitor, a warning that his fate was in jeopardy. Bambi wiped away her tears and attempted to remain tough, but she was losing her composure due to the stress of the situation. The media was going berserk, with every major outlet covering the news. As the condition of little Scrappy worsened, the headlines proclaimed that the family was in despair. Fans gathered outside the hospital to pray, hold candles, and hope for a miracle after deteriorating health became viral. Paparazzi with flashing cameras swarmed reporters hungry for any inside scoop. Becomes worse. Medical professionals worry that Scrappy might require life support. When Scrappy's closest pals, Kirk Frost, Rashida, and Wajak, came in via the open door, there was a lot of anxiety inside. Their faces blanched with concern. They rushed to Bambi, and Mam D. Jock insisted, "Hey, what the devil is happening?" "I think he was improving," but Bambi shook her head, at a loss for words. As the doctor explained that his organs were having trouble and that his heart was under too much pressure, Rashida took a deep breath and covered her mouth in a gasp. She screamed, "Oh my God, this is impossible." Kirk Frost took a step forward and touched Bambi's shoulder. "We are available to you for Scrappy. We have everything you need." Ambi's eyes were filled with tears, she said. "All I need is for him to wake up. He must fight for me." Everyone froze, holding their breath, their faces unreadable. "Slowly, we've done more tests," he remarked. Prior to presenting the findings, he paused to inspect Scrappy's unconscious body. Bambi was on the verge of fainting when Kirk caught her and held her in place, saying, "They don't make any promises." This indicates that she cowed Dr. Mitchell's side. His heartbeat is erratic, and his kidneys are no longer functioning as well. If this keeps up, he may. Dialysis and high-dose treatments are on the horizon, but we need his body to react first. If it doesn't, we might have to think about placing him on life support. Dr. Mitchell nodded, and young Jock's fists clenched as he let out a collective scream. Oh, Mama's voice broke as she screamed, "My child is robust. He doesn't require any machines to survive." "Dude, this is incorrect. You guys must be able to do something." Bambi's head turned toward the screen as the impact of those words caused the room to go silent and the heart monitor to begin beeping wildly. Panic was starting to set in as Dr. Mitchell hurried to the patient's bedside, his pulse thumping, and said to the nurses, "I know this is challenging, but our options are becoming limited." As the young Jock inspected the nurses, administered medications, and swiftly changed machinery, everyone's heart stopped beating in sync with the unpredictable beat on the screen, and the stress became excruciating in an instant. At last, the beeping ceased, and Dr. Mitchell let out a breath. "All right, we got him stabilized," but the fact that Bambi collapsed into a chair after burying her face in her hands indicates that the situation is critical. "It's not possible," she exclaimed. "I can't allow." Then, As if the universe had heard them, Scrappy stirred, twitching his fingers and moving his eyelids slightly. Mama D was kneeling next to her, her hands clasped tightly, and she said, "We won't lose him, baby. We're going to fight. We're going to fight with all of our might." Young Jock shook his head and paced the room, saying, "This isn't how things should be." When Bambi let out a gasp, everyone hurried to join him. He could hardly be heard speaking. "I'm here, I'm Scrappy," strained to maintain eye contact. His voice was weak. His breathing was shallow. "Then what's going on?" Dr. Mitchell interrupted gently. "You've been in the intensive care unit, Scrappy. Your body is battling fearfully in an attempt to comprehend." Scrappy swallowed. "Am I going to die?" Bambi quickly shook her head and said, "No, sweetheart, you will be all right. All you need to do is stay alive." Mother D wiped away her tears, and Scrappy forced a small smile, saying, "I'm still here." Dr. Mitchell's face remained solemn, and Scrappy knew that he needed to fight even harder because everything would be decided in the next 24 hours. Scrappy kissed his forehead, took a slow blink, and said, "I got you," but as optimism started to grow too much. This time, the hospital room was filled with uncertainty, and the sound of the beeping machines broke the eerie silence like a threatening clock ticking away every second. The machines were blaring again, Scrappy stiffened, and his breathing became irregular. Dr. Mitchell's face turned white, and the room erupted in panic as the nursing staff felt pain. The battle was far from over. It was just getting started, and it was life or death. The beep and machine noise reminded everyone that Lil Scrappy's time was running out, and the once bright rapper who had enthralled the world with his energy now appeared to be a fragile shell struggling for survival, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Bambi sat beside him, holding Scrappy's limp hand with trembling hands after spending countless hours by his bedside and having sleepless nights. Mama D, the matriarch who had always been Scrappy's strongest ally, paced back and forth, her hands so tightly gripping her phone that they whitened her face and knuckles, her eyes swollen from crying, her stomach twisted in fear every time the monitors beeped, and she muttered, "Please, Scrappy, you promised me you wouldn't abandon me." She had always been a rock, but now she was unable to do anything but watch as her son's life was at Jeet's party. She prayed to herself, but she knew deep down that faith alone would not save him at this point. There was more to it. Outside the hospital, fans flooded social media with prayers and pleas for Scrappy's recovery, with hashtags like #fight taking over Twitter and Instagram. We all watched, prayed, and hoped for an internal miracle, but things were different. Scrappy's liver condition had gotten worse, and his friends, fellow artists, and even people who had previously argued with him had sent messages asking their followers to remember him, along with the hashtag prayer for Scrappy's heart and foot. The doctors had just intervened with the shocking results of the most recent test. "But just yesterday, you said he was getting better." Bambi's voice faltered as she asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. How did this happen? How could it have changed so quickly? Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath, regret shining in his eyes. He could feel the strain increasing on his already troubled heart, and his oxygen levels had dropped again. Not always predicted, but issues have now emerged despite some improvement in his organs. "What do you mean?" Mama D asked incredulously and in an IR tone. "It is insufficient. What shall we do?" "You're telling me that you're at your limit." Dr. Mitchell paused, his expression darkening. "Whilst we're doing everything we can, we may need to take. We might have to think about emergency dialysis or possibly a transplant if he doesn't stabilize in the next 24 hours. We might have to put him on life support if his heart keeps failing." Bambi started crying uncontrollably as her voice broke with raw anguish. "He is a belligerent person. Therefore, you can't do that. Scrappy's protective instincts will take control, and this is not how she will pass away." "My son," Mama D stepped forward. As the doctor left the room, the situation weighed heavily on Bambi and Mama D, and their silence intensified. They both felt that time was running short, but neither of them knew what to say. "We are going to fight. We must." Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. He has endured too much to give up at this point. He won't be leaving. We're exerting every effort the next 24 hours, but it is critical we must be ready for anything. Out and that waiting and praying were their only choices. Reporters scrambled to find any information as paparazzi cameras flashed outside the hospital as the media circus outside intensified. The tone had changed, even if fans were still sending supportive comments, as news sources ran articles with headlines like "Doctors fear Scrappy's life is on the line and Lil Scrappy's condition worsens, family desperate recovery." Survival was the main concern, and Bambi stood up with a resolute voice now that she was at her breaking point. Mama D nodded, acknowledging that, in spite of her own emotional difficulties, not all we're doing is praying. We are engaged in combat. We will not abandon him. Everyone needs to be called, she said. We need as many prayers as POS possible. We must fight. We must not abandon him. Bambi took out her phone and called her close friends and family members. She was certain that Scrappy's spirit would live on through his loved ones, even in the face of the apparent loss of hope and the prayers that love must be sufficient, because Scrappy was always reminded of his vulnerability by the buzzes and beats of the machinery around him. The tension in the room must have been intolerable. Each time the machine sounded, Bambi's hand grip tightened around his, preventing him from releasing it. Now the miracle came just when he needed her most. A tiny movement that might have gone overlooked. Scrappy's twitching fingers meant the world to Bambi. She gasped and leaned closer, struggling to concentrate as her heart thumped in her chest. She said, her voice full of hope, and Scrappy's eyes, unable to focus, opened and closed. He mumbled, breathing, and his voice, which was hardly heard, was sufficient. Bambi's heart grew as she sobbed hysterically. A collective sigh of relief filled the room, still echoing in the doorway, but Dr. Mitchell was calm. She kissed him on the forehead and said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine. Just take a nap." Mama D knelt next to her son and wiped away her own tears, saying, a little smile came to Scrappy's lips. "I will remain here." He stepped closer, his face grave, unconvinced. With his eyes fixed on Bambi's, he whispered, "You must continue to fight for us. Everything will be decided in the next 24 hours. He answered, "I understand you." But as the faintest hope appeared, Scrappy's chest rose and fell in response to a series of louder than before harsh beats coming from the devices. Bambi's stomach fell when nurses flooded the room and Dr. Mitchell yelled, his voice piercing with anxiety, "We must move quickly, injecting drugs, adjusting machines, and cooperating with a sense of urgency that only came with life or death situations." "What's going on?" she wondered haltingly. In quick, irregular breaths as his body tensed with pale faces, the medical staff hurried into the room to try to stabilize him. When VJC lost his temper in the corner, he did something. Hours passed as everyone watched the heart monitor and hoped that the beeping would stop as he yelled, his voice trembling with fear. The doctors all let out a collective sigh after what felt like an age, and Dr. Mitchell turned to face Mama D and Bambi. "We have stabilized him for the time being, but it's only the beginning. Given his precarious state, we must be prepared for anything. I can't let him go." After Bambi collapsed into a chair while holding her head in her hands. "Her hands cannot be in mine. We won't lose him. We'll battle till he overcomes this." Mama knelt next to her. The war was just getting started, not finished. This is a fight for Lil Scrappy's life. Therefore, please, during the next 24 hours, every prayer counts. Please leave your opinions in the space provided for comments below if you think that support is effective. Together, we can support Scrappy and his family during this extremely trying time. For the most recent information on this startling circumstance, remember to subscribe to our channel. We'll update you on the story's progress at every turn. Remember to stay in touch. Persistent.